Brown is the color of dark wood or rich soil. It is a composite color. In printing or painting, it is made by combining red, black and yellow, or red, yellow and blue. In the RGB color model used to make colors on television screens and computer monitors, it is made by combining red and green, in specific proportions. The color is seen widely in nature, in wood, soil, and human hair color, eye color and skin pigmentation. In Europe and the United States, it is the color most often associated with plainness, humility, the rustic, and poverty. It is also, according to public opinion surveys in Europe and the United States, the least favorite color of the public. Shades and varieties of brown, see also variations of brown. Etymology, the term is from Old English braen, in origin for any dusky or dark shade of color. The first recorded use of brown as a color name in English was in 1000. The common Germanic adjective braunos meant both dark colors and a glistening or shining quality, whence burnish. The current meaning developed in Middle English from the 14th century. Words for the color brown around the world often come from foods or beverages. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the word for brown often comes from the color of coffee. In Turkish, the word for brown is kahverengi. In Greek, kafar copyright, in Macedonian, kafuov. In Southeast Asia, the color name often comes from chocolate, coklat in Malay. Tsokolate in Filipino. In Japan, the word shalira means the color of tea. History and art, the ancient world, brown has been used in art since prehistoric times. Paintings using umber, a natural clay pigment composed of iron oxide and manganese oxide, have been dated to 40,000 BC. Paintings of brown horses and other animals have been found on the walls of the Lascaux cave dating back about 17,300 years. The female figures in ancient Egyptian tomb paintings have brown skin, painted with umber. Light tan was often used on painted Greek amphorae and vases either as a background for black figures, or the reverse. The ancient Greeks and Romans produced a fine reddish-brown ink, of a color called sepia, made from the ink of a variety of cuttlefish. This ink was used by Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael and other artists during the Renaissance, and by artists up until the present time. In ancient Rome, brown clothing was associated with the lower classes or barbarians. The term for the plebeians, or urban poor, was pulati, which meant literally those dressed in brown. The Middle Ages and Renaissance. In the Middle Ages, brown robes were worn by monks of the Franciscan order, as a sign of their humility and poverty. Each social class was expected to wear a color suitable to their station. And gray and brown were the colors of the poor. Russet was a coarse homespun cloth made of wool and dyed with woad and madder to give it a subdued gray or brown shade. By the Statute of 1363, poor English people were required to wear russet. The medieval poem Piers Plowman describes the virtuous Christian, and is glad of a gown of a grey russet, as of a tunicle of tars or of triscarlet. In the Middle Ages, dark brown pigments were rarely used in art. Painters and book illuminators artists of that period preferred bright, distinct colors such as red, blue and green, rather than dark colors. The umbers were not widely used in Europe before the end of the 15th century. The Renaissance painter and writer Giorgio Vasari described them as being rather new in his time. Artists began using far greater use of browns when oil painting arrived in the late 15th century. During the Renaissance, artists generally used 4 different browns. Raw umber, the dark brown clay mined from the earth around Umbria, in Italy. Raw sienna, a reddish-brown earth mine near Siena, in Tuscany. Burnt umber, the Umbrian clay heated until it turned a darker shade, and burnt sienna, heated until it turned a dark reddish-brown. In Northern Europe, Jan van Eyck featured rich earth browns in his portraits to set off the brighter colors. 17th and 18th century, the 17th and 18th century saw the greatest use of brown. Caravaggio and Rembrandt van Rijn used browns to create chiaroscuro effects, where the subject appeared out of the darkness. Rembrandt also added umber to the ground layers of his paintings because it promoted faster drying. Rembrandt also began to use new brown pigment, called Castle earth or Cologne earth. This was a natural earth color composed of over 90% organic matter, such as soil and peat. It was used by Rubens and Antony van Dyck, and later became commonly known as Van Dyck brown. 19th and 20th century, brown was generally hated by the French Impressionists, who preferred bright, pure colors. The exception among French 19th-century artists was Paul Gauguin, who created luminous brown portraits of the people and landscapes of French Polynesia. In Harlem in the mid-20th century, lighter brown skin was considered more socially desirable in the African American community. In her 1942 glossary of Harlem slang, Zora Neale Hurston placed high-yaller, or very light brown, at the beginning of her African American color scale, which ran, in the 1920s, brown became the uniform color of the Nazi Party in Germany. The Nazi paramilitary organization the Sturmatier wore brown uniforms and were known as the Brown Shirts. The color brown was used to represent the Nazi vote on maps of electoral districts in Germany. If someone voted for the Nazis, they were said to be voting brown. The national headquarters of the Nazi Party, in Munich, was called the Brown House. The Nazi seizure of power in 1933 was called the Brown Revolution. At Adolf Hitler's Obersalzberg home, the Berghof, he slept in a bed which was usually covered by a brown quilt embroidered with a huge swastika. The swastika also appeared on Hitler's brown satin pajamas, embroidered in black against a red background on the pocket. He had a matching brown silk robe. Brown had originally been chosen as a party color largely for convenience. Large numbers of war surplus brown uniforms from Germany's former colonial forces in Africa were cheaply available in the 1920s. It also suited the working class and military images that the party wished to convey. Through the 1930s, the party's brown uniforms were mass-produced by the German clothing firm owned by Hugo Boss. Boss became a member of the Nazi Party in 1931, and was licensed supplier for the SA, the SS, and the Hitler Youth. After World War II he was stripped of his right to vote and his presidency of the company, but the company continued in business and still carries his name. In the late 20th century, brown became a common symbol in Western culture for simple, inexpensive, natural and healthy. Bag lunches were carried in plain brown paper bags. Packages were wrapped in plain brown paper. Brown bread and brown sugar were viewed as more natural and healthy than white bread and white sugar. Brown in science and nature, optics, brown is a composite color, made by combining red, yellow and black. In the RGB color model, which uses red, green and blue light in various combinations to make all the colors on computer and television screens, it is made by mixing red and green light. In terms of the visible spectrum, brown refers to high wavelength hues, yellow, orange, or red, in combination with low luminance or saturation. Since brown may cover a wide range of the visible spectrum, composite adjectives are used such as red-brown, yellowish-brown, dark brown or light brown. As a color of low intensity, brown is a tertiary color, a mix of the three subtractive primary colors is brown if the cyan content is low. Brown exists as a color perception only in the presence of a brighter color contrast. Yellow, orange, red, or rose objects are still perceived as such if the general illumination level is low, despite reflecting the same amount of red or orange light as a brown object would in normal lighting conditions. Brown pigments, dyes and inks, raw umber and burnt umber are two of the oldest pigments used by man. Umber is a brown clay, containing a large amount of iron oxide and between 5 and 20% manganese oxide, which give the color. Its shade varies from a greenish-brown to a dark brown. It takes its name from the Italian region of Umbria, where it was formerly mined. The principal source today is the island of Cyprus. Burnt umber is the same pigment which has been roasted, which turns the pigment darker and more reddish. Raw sienna and burnt sienna are also clay pigments rich in iron oxide, which were mined during the Renaissance around the city of Siena in Tuscany. Sienna contains less than 5% manganese. The natural sienna earth is a dark yellow ochre color. When roasted it becomes a rich reddish brown called burnt sienna. Van Dyck brown, known in Europe as Cologne earth or Castle earth, is another natural earth pigment that was made up largely of decayed vegetal matter. It made a rich dark brown, and was widely used during the Renaissance to the 19th century. It takes its name from the painter Anthony van Dyck, but it was used by many other artists before him. It was highly unstable and unreliable, so its use was abandoned by the 20th century, though the name continues to be used for modern synthetic pigments. The color of Van Dyck brown can be recreated by mixing ivory black with mauve or with Venetian red, or mixing cadmium red with cobalt blue. Mars brown. The names of the earth colors are still used, but very few modern pigments with these names actually contain natural earths. Most of their ingredients today are synthetic. Mars brown is typical of these new colors, made with synthetic iron oxide pigments. The new colors have a superior coloring power and opacity, but not the delicate hue as their namesakes. Walnuts have been used to make a brown dye since antiquity. The Roman writer Ovid, in the 1st century BC, described how the Gauls used the juice of the hull or husk inside the shell of the walnut to make a brown dye for wool, or a reddish dye for their hair. The chestnut tree has also been used since ancient times as a source brown dye. The bark of the tree, the leaves and the husk of the nuts have all been used to make dye. The leaves were used to make a beige or yellowish-brown dye, and in the Ottoman Empire the yellow-brown from chestnut leaves was combined with indigo blue to make shades of green. Sepia is a reddish-brown ink from the ink sac of the common cuttlefish sepia. It was used for writing and drawing by the Romans, and by Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael and many other artists of the Renaissance. The gall nut, a small round growth on oak trees caused by insects, was also used for making a dark brown writing ink. Iron gall ink was a purple-black or brown-black ink made from iron salts and tannic acids from the gall nut. It was the standard writing and drawing ink in Europe, from about the 12th century to the 19th century, and remained in use well into the 20th century. Brown eyes. In humans, brown eyes result from a relatively high concentration of melanin in the stroma of the iris, which causes light of both shorter and longer wavelengths to be absorbed, and in many parts of the world, it is nearly the only iris color present. Dark pigment of brown eyes is most common in East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, West Asia, Oceania, Africa, Americas, etc., as well as parts of Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. The majority of people in the world overall have dark brown eyes. Light or medium pigmented brown eyes are common in Europe, Afghanistan, Pakistan and northern India, as well as some parts of the Middle East. Brown hair. Brown is the second most common color of human hair, after black. It is caused by higher levels of the natural dark pigment eumelanin, and lower levels of the pale pigment pheomelanin. Brown eumelanin is more common among Europeans, while black eumelanin is more often found in the hair on non-Europeans. A small amount of black eumelanin, in the absence of other pigments, results in gray hair. A small amount of brown eumelanin in the absence of other pigments results in blonde hair. In Western popular culture, a common stereotype is that brunettes are stable, serious, smart and sophisticated. A British study into hair color and the intensity of attraction found that 62% of the men participating in the study associated brown-haired women with stability and competence. Brunettes were described as independent and self-sufficient by 67% of the men, and as intelligent by 81%. Brown skin. A majority of people in the world have skin that is a shade of brown, from a very light honey brown or a golden brown, to a copper or bronze color, to a coffee color or a dark chocolate brown. Skin color and race are not the same. Many people classified as white, or black actually have skin that is a shade of brown. Brown skin is caused by melanin, a natural pigment which is produced within the skin in cells called melanocytes. Skin pigmentation in humans evolved to primarily regulate the amount of ultraviolet radiation penetrating the skin, controlling its biochemical effects. Natural skin color can darken as a result of tanning due to exposure to sunlight. The leading theory is that skin color adapts to intense sunlight irradiation to provide partial protection against the ultraviolet diffraction that produces damage and thus mutations in the DNA of the skin cells. There is a correlation between the geographic distribution of ultraviolet radiation and the distribution of indigenous skin pigmentation around the world. Darker skin populations are found in the regions with the most ultraviolet, closer to the equator, while lighter skin populations live closer to the poles, with less UVR. Though immigration has changed these patterns. While white and black are commonly used to describe racial groups, brown is rarely used, because it crosses all racial lines. In Brazil, the Portuguese word pardo, which can mean different shades of brown, is used to refer to multiracial people. The Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics asks people to identify themselves as branco, pardo, preto, or amarelo. In 2008, 43.8% of the population identified themselves as pardo. Soil. The thin top layer of the Earth's crust on land is largely made up of soil-colored different shades of brown. Good soil is composed of about 45% minerals, 25% water, 25% air, and 5% organic material, living and dead. Half the color of soil comes from minerals it contains. Soils containing iron turn yellowish or reddish as the iron oxidizes. Manganese, nitrogen and sulfur turn brownish or blackish as they decay naturally. Rich and fertile soils tend to be darker in color. The deeper brown color of fertile soil comes from the decomposing of the organic matter. Dead leaves and roots become black or brown as they decay. Poorer soils are usually paler brown in color, and contain less water or organic matter. Mollisls are the soil type found under grassland in the Great Plains of America, the Pampas in Argentina and the Russian steppes. The soil is 60–80 cm deep and is rich in nutrients and organic matter. Loess is a type of pale yellow or buff soil, which originated as wind-blown silt. It is very fertile, but is easily eroded by wind or water. Peat is an accumulation of partially decayed vegetation, whose decomposition is slowed by water. Despite its dark brown color, it is infertile, but is useful as a fuel. Mammals. A large number of mammals and predatory birds have a brown coloration. This sometimes changes seasonally, and sometimes remains the same year-round. This color is likely related to camouflage, since the backdrop of some environments, such as the forest floor, is often brown, and especially in the spring and summertime when animals like the snowshoe hare get brown fur. The brown rat or Norwegian rat is one of the best-known and most common rats. The brown bear is a large bear distributed across much of northern Eurasia and North America. The ermine has a brown back in summer, or year-round in the southern reaches of its range. Biology. The solid waste excreted by human beings and many other animals is characteristically brown in color due to the presence of bilirubin, a byproduct of destruction of red blood cells. Brown in culture. Brown is the least loved of colors. A survey showed that brown was the favorite color of only 1% of respondents, ranked below white and pink, and the least favorite color of 20% of people, even less popular than pink, gray and violet. Brown uniforms. Brown has been a popular color for military uniforms since the late 18th century, largely because of its wide availability and low visibility. When the Continental Army was established in 1775 at the outbreak of the American Revolution, the First Continental Congress declared that the official uniform color would be brown, but this was not popular with many militias, whose officers were already wearing blue. In 1778 the Congress asked George Washington to design a new uniform, and in 1779 Washington made the official color of all uniforms blue and buff. In 1846 the Indian soldiers of the Corps of Guides in British India began to wear a yellowish shade of tan, which became known as khaki from the Urdu word for dust-colored, taken from an earlier Persian word for soil. The color made an excellent natural camouflage, and was adopted by the British Army for their Abyssinian campaign in 1867–1868, and later in the Boer War. It was adopted by the United States Army during the Spanish–American War, and afterwards by the United States Navy and United States Marine Corps. Business. Pullman brown is the color of the United Parcel Service Delivery Company with their trademark brown trucks and uniforms. It was earlier the color of Pullman rail cars of the Pullman Company. and was adopted by UPS both because brown is easy to keep clean, and due to favorable associations of luxury that Pullman brown evoked. UPS has filed 2 trademarks on the color brown to prevent other shipping companies from using the color if it creates market confusion. In its advertising, UPS refers to itself as brown. Idioms and expressions: to be brown as a berry, to brown bag a meal, to experience a brownout. Brownfields are abandoned, idled, or underused industrial and commercial facilities where redevelopment for infill housing is complicated by real or perceived environmental contaminations. Brown nose is a verb which means to be obsequious. It comes from the term for kissing the posterior of the boss in order to gain advancement. In a Brown study, Parapsychology, it is said that people who have brown auras are often unethical businessmen who are in business purely for the sake of greed, or people who are just generally greedy and avaricious. Sports: the Cleveland Browns of the National Football League take their team name from its founder and longtime coach, Paul Brown, and use brown as a team color. See also, variations of brown, list of colors, references, Varicon, Anne. Couleurs, pigments et teintes dans les mains des pupils. Paris, Editions du Seuil. ISBN A978-2-02-084697-4. Heller, Eva. Psychologie de la couleur, efforts et symboliques. Munich, Pyramide. ISBN A978-2-35017-156-2. Notes and citations. External links: media related to Brown at Wikimedia Commons.